Derrick Ryan Dearman spent 6 years on Alabama's death row, his life ticking down to a final moment of reckoning. But to understand how he ended up strapped to that gurney, we have to rewind to a troubled boy in a small Mississippi town, where the seeds of tragedy were sown long before the bloodshed began. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to help grow our community, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Derrick Dearman was born in 1988 in Greene County, Mississippi, a rural corner of the Deep South where life moved slow and opportunities were scarce. His family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't destitute either, just ordinary folks trying to get by. His parents, both local to the area, struggled with their own demons, and court records later revealed their testimony that Derrick's lifelong battle with drug addiction became the dark thread weaving through his story. But what pushed him down that path? As a young boy, Derrick showed troubling signs early on. At just 4 years old, he told his mother he wanted to die, a chilling confession for a child barely old enough to understand life. By 12, he was prescribed antidepressants, a band-aid for a mind already wrestling with shadows. His home life wasn't a haven. While there's no public record of physical abuse, the emotional weight of his environment pressed hard. His parents' struggles and a lack of stability left Derrick unmoored, searching for something to fill the void. School wasn't much of an escape. Growing up in Leakesville, Mississippi, Derrick was a kid who didn't quite fit. He wasn't a star student, and teachers noticed his mood swings, quiet one day, explosive the next. By 14, he was self-medicating with crack cocaine, a choice that hinted at deeper pain. Was it the depression? The sense of being trapped in a small town with no way out? Whatever it was, the drugs took hold, pulling him into a cycle that would define his life. At 16, Derrick turned to methamphetamine, a drug that would later fuel his darkest act. His teenage years were a blur of bad decisions. A car accident at 14 nearly killed him, leaving him with a lingering sense that he should have died, a thought that haunted him. By 19, he was so lost to addiction that he drove his car off the road in a deliberate attempt to end his life. He survived, but the hospital stay that followed landed him in a psychiatric unit. Doctors noted his suicidal tendencies, diagnosing him with bipolar disorder, PTSD, chronic depression, and even signs of a neurocognitive disorder. Yet, the system sent him back to the same environment, with little support to change his course. What was it about that small-town life that kept pulling Derrick deeper into chaos? His relationships were stormy, marked by volatility that mirrored his inner turmoil. By his early 20s, he was a young man teetering on the edge, addicted, unstable, and desperate for control in a world that felt like it was slipping away. These were the years that built the Derrick Dearman who would one day walk into a house in Citronelle, Alabama, with an axe in hand. But what pushed him from a troubled kid to a man capable of unimaginable violence? That's where the story takes a darker turn. The 5 victims of the 2016 Citronelle murders were more than names in a tragedy. They were vibrant people with dreams, love, and lives cut short. Each was connected to Lanita Lester, Derrick Dearman's estranged girlfriend, through family or friendship, living together in a small, rural home on Jim Platt Road in Citronelle, Alabama. Their stories paint a picture of ordinary people, bound by love and hope, whose lives were forever altered by a single night. Joseph Adam Turner, 26, was Lanita's older brother, a man with a big heart who opened his home to those in need. Described as loving and protective, Joseph was the anchor of the household. He was married to Shannon Randall, and together they had a 3-month-old son, Darren. Joseph was a hard worker who cherished his young family, dreaming of giving his son a safe and happy life. His home was a refuge, not just for his sister escaping an abusive relationship, but for others looking for a fresh start. His welcoming nature put him directly in Dearman's path when Lanita sought shelter from her abuser. Shannon Melissa Randall, 35, Joseph's wife, was a warm and caring mother. Known as Shawn to those close to her, she was a nurturing figure who doted on her infant son and treated everyone like family. Shannon had a deep bond with her brother, Robert Lee Brown, and her niece, Chelsea Reed, who both lived with her. She loved quiet evenings at home, like the cookout and movie night the group enjoyed the evening before the tragedy. Her decision to call the police when Dearman showed up that night showed her strength, but it also marked the beginning of a fateful chain of events. Robert Lee Brown, 26, Shannon's brother, was a kind and loyal friend who joined the household for the cookout that night. Described as caring, he was always ready to lend a hand. Robert was close to his sister and her family, finding comfort in their tight-knit circle. His presence in the home was by chance, a guest who stayed to enjoy time with loved ones. Little did he know that his decision to spend the night would pull him into Dearman's rage. Justin Caleb Reed, 23, and Chelsea Marie Reed, 22, were high school sweethearts, inseparable and full of life. They were spontaneous, loved video games, and were thrilled about starting their own family. Chelsea was 5 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they planned to name Aiden. The couple had recently returned to Citronelle after a brief time in California, excited to settle down near family. They were staying with Joseph and Shannon while searching for a place of their own. Their connection to Dearman came through Chelsea's family ties. She was Shannon's niece, placing them in the wrong place at the wrong time when Dearman's obsession with Lanita erupted. These five were a family, not just by blood but by choice, living together in a modest home filled with love and plans for the future. Their lives intertwined with Dearman through Lanita, who had fled to her brother's house to escape his abuse. What brought them together that night was a shared sense of safety, until Dearman shattered it. How did one man's rage turn a quiet night into a nightmare? On August 19, 2016, the small house on Jim Platt Road in Citronelle, Alabama, was a haven for its 6 residents and 1 guest. The group had enjoyed a low-key evening, hosting a cookout and settling in to watch a movie. Lanita Lester, who had moved in to escape her abusive ex-boyfriend, Derrick Dearman, was sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. The others, Joseph, Shannon, their infant son Darren, Robert, Justin, and Chelsea, were asleep in the home's 2 bedrooms. But the peace of that night wouldn't last. Around 11 p.m., Dearman showed up at the house, uninvited. He had been dating Lanita since January, but their relationship was marked by violence. Lanita had left him, seeking safety with her brother. When Dearman appeared, Shannon called the Citronelle Police Department, reporting him for trespassing. Officers arrived, patrolled the wooded area around the house, but found no sign of him and left. The residents went back to sleep, unaware that Dearman was still nearby, watching. At around 3 a.m. on August 20th, Dearman returned, his mind clouded by methamphetamine. He had been using heavily, later admitting he hadn't slept for 6 days and was hearing voices, believing people were after him. In the front yard, he spotted an axe embedded in a tree. According to Mobile County District Attorney Ashley Rich, Dearman decided, "If I can't have Lanita, they can't have her either." He knocked on Lanita's window, and, according to some accounts, she briefly went outside to talk, telling him their relationship was over. She returned inside, locking the door, but Dearman wasn't done. Using a screwdriver, he broke into the house through a sliding door. Armed with the axe, he moved silently through the small home. In one bedroom, Joseph and Shannon slept with their infant son between them. Dearman struck first, bludgeoning them with the axe as they lay defenseless. The baby was unharmed, left crying in the chaos. In the second bedroom, Robert, Justin, and Chelsea were asleep. Dearman attacked them with the same brutal force, swinging the axe with intent to kill. But he didn't stop there. Inside the house, he found a shotgun and a .45 caliber handgun. To ensure his victims were dead, Dearman shot each one: Joseph, Shannon, Robert, Justin, and Chelsea, who was carrying her unborn son. The scene was described by authorities as one of the most horrific in Mobile County's history, with 5 lives taken in a matter of minutes. What drove Dearman to such violence? Court records point to a toxic mix of drug-fueled paranoia and obsessive control over Lanita. He later claimed he thought someone was after him, but his actions suggested a deliberate intent to punish those who sheltered her. After the killings, Dearman wasn't finished. He forced Lanita and the 3-month-old Darren into a car and drove 30 miles to his father's house in Leakesville, Mississippi. Along the way, he stopped at other houses, still seeking drugs, keeping Lanita in fear for her life and the babies. At his father's home, Dearman began to come down from his high. Lanita seized her chance, escaping with Darren and driving back to Citronelle to alert the police. Around the same time, Dearman's father convinced him to turn himself in. Dearman walked into the Greene County Sheriff's Office, initially trying to surrender for unpaid child support, but after his father's urging, he confessed to the murders. What made this crime so shocking? It wasn't just the brutality, it was the betrayal. These victims had done nothing but offer Lanita a safe place to rebuild her life. Dearman's motive was rooted in control, fueled by drugs, and a refusal to let Lanita go. The small, close-knit community of Citronelle was left reeling, forever changed by a night that turned love and refuge into loss. But what happened next, as Dearman faced justice, would reveal even more about the man behind the massacre. After the horrific Citronelle murders on August 20th, 2016, the investigation moved fast, driven by a survivor's courage and a killer's unraveling mind. Lanita Lester, Dearman's estranged girlfriend, escaped with the 3-month-old baby, Darren, and drove straight to the Citronelle Police Department. Her testimony was the first clue. She told police that Dearman had broken into her brother's home on Jim Platt Road, killed 5 people, and abducted her and the infant. Her account gave authorities a clear suspect, Derrick Ryan Dearman, a 27-year-old man with a history of drug abuse and violence. But where was he now? Police descended on the crime scene, a small house in rural Mobile County, Alabama, about 30 miles north of Mobile. What they found was chilling. 5 bodies: Joseph Turner, Shannon Randall, Robert Brown, Justin Reed, and Chelsea Reed, who was 5 months pregnant. Brutally attacked with an axe and shot. The scene was so gruesome that investigators called it the worst in Mobile County's history. The murder weapons, an axe found in the yard, a .45 pistol, and a shotgun, were still in the house, linking the crime to someone who knew the layout. Blood evidence and the sheer violence pointed to a personal motive, not a random act. Lanita's statement about Dearman's abusive behavior and his obsession with her gave police a clear picture of his rage-fueled intent. The manhunt didn't last long. Dearman had fled to his father's house in Leakesville, Mississippi, about 30 miles away, with Lanita and the baby in tow. After stopping at other homes in a drug-fueled haze, he reached his father's place, where Lanita saw her chance to escape. She took the baby and drove back to Citronelle, alerting police. Meanwhile, Dearman's father, Gary, confronted him. According to reports, Dearman initially tried to turn himself in at the Greene County Sheriff's Office for unpaid child support, perhaps hoping to dodge the real charges. But his father urged him to confess the truth. Dearman broke down, admitting to the murders. On August 20th, 2016, he surrendered at the sheriff's office, just hours after the killings. As he was escorted to Mobile County Metro Jail 2 days later, he spoke to reporters, his head hung low, saying, "Don't do drugs," and apologizing, claiming he came down from his meth high and realized what he'd done. The case came together quickly. Lanita's testimony, the weapons found at the scene, and Dearman's own confession left little doubt. He was charged with 6 counts of capital murder, including one for Chelsea Reed's unborn child under Alabama's fetal homicide law, and 2 counts of kidnapping. In March 2017, he was indicted, and by August, a mental evaluation ordered by Circuit Judge Rick Stout confirmed he was competent to stand trial. Dearman initially pleaded not guilty, but in 2018, he fired his attorneys and changed his plea to guilty. Alabama law required a jury to hear the case for capital murder, and in September 2018, they found him guilty on 10 counts of capital murder, unanimously recommending the death penalty. On October 12, 2018, Judge Stout sentenced Dearman to death, rejecting claims of mental unfitness and noting the calculated nature of the shootings after the axe attacks. But what happened to Dearman after the cell door closed? Derrick Dearman's 6 years on Alabama's death row at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore were a stark contrast to the chaos of his earlier life. Holman, a grim, isolated prison in southern Alabama, houses the state's execution chamber and most of its death row inmates. The environment was bleak. Small cells, limited sunlight, and the constant weight of impending death. Dearman, now in his 30s, lived in this confined world, where days blended into one another with little to break the monotony. Inmates on death row often spend 23 hours a day in their cells, with limited access to recreation or contact with others. Guards described the atmosphere as tense, with inmates grappling with their fates in different ways. Dearman's behavior in prison was complex. He claimed to find religion, a shift that his spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, said was genuine. Hood described Dearman as deeply remorseful, believing his execution was a way to atone for his crimes. In April 2024, Dearman made a shocking move. He fired his attorneys from the Equal Justice Initiative and wrote letters to Alabama officials, including Governor Kay Ivey and Attorney General Steve Marshall, asking to drop his appeals and face execution. "I am guilty, plain and simple," he told AL.com. It's not fair to the victims or their families to continue to delay the justice they so rightly deserve. He insisted he wasn't suicidal, but felt execution was the only way to give closure. Yet, Dearman's time on death row wasn't without struggle. He admitted to using illegal drugs smuggled into the prison, even as late as 2 days before his execution on October 17, 2024. He spoke of his meth addiction as a driving force behind the murders, saying, "If I was sober, that would have never happened." His mental health remained a point of contention. His lawyers had argued he was mentally ill at the time of the crimes, citing his history of bipolar disorder, PTSD, and suicidal behavior, but courts found him competent. Dearman himself described the murders as if someone else had the steering wheel, a haunting reflection of his drug-fueled state. His interactions with others were limited but telling. He maintained contact with his father, Gary, who visited him in the 24 hours before his execution. On October 17, 2024, Derrick Ryan Dearman woke up in his cell at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, knowing it was his last day. After 6 years on death row, the 36-year-old had chosen to end his appeals, insisting he was ready to face the consequences for the brutal 2016 Citronelle murders of 5 people. The weight of that decision hung heavy as the hours ticked down. What would a man like Dearman do with his final moments? The morning began quietly in the stark, isolated world of death row. Dearman, housed in a small cell near the execution chamber, was under constant watch by guards. Alabama's execution protocol meant he'd been moved to a death watch cell days earlier, where he could reflect in solitude. Reports from his spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, suggest Dearman spent much of the day in prayer, grappling with the enormity of his crimes. He'd found faith in prison, claiming it gave him peace, but could it truly calm the storm inside a man who'd taken so much? Around midday, Dearman received his final visitors. His father, Gary Dearman, came to say goodbye, a moment heavy with unspoken pain. The two had stayed in touch during Dearman's incarceration, and this visit was their last chance to connect. Reverend Hood was also there, offering spiritual support as Dearman prepared for what lay ahead. Did they talk about forgiveness, regret, or the lives lost? Those details remain private, but Hood later said Dearman was deeply remorseful, focused on atoning for his actions. As evening approached, Dearman was offered his last meal, a choice that reflected his southern roots. He requested a seafood platter from a local restaurant, fried catfish, shrimp, oysters, onion rings, and a deviled crab. The meal was delivered to his cell, a small comfort in the face of what was coming. Did he savor each bite, or was his mind elsewhere, replaying the night he destroyed 5 lives? The answer died with him, but the meal was a fleeting moment of normalcy in an otherwise surreal day. At around 5:30 p.m., guards escorted Dearman from his cell to the execution chamber, a short walk within Holman's walls. The chamber, a clinical room with a gurney at its center, was prepared for lethal injection, Alabama's primary execution method since 2002. Witnesses gathered in an adjacent viewing room, separated by a glass window. Among them were relatives of the victims, Bryant Randall, whose daughter Shannon, sister Chelsea, and brother Robert were killed, and others who had waited years for this moment. Dearman's own family was also present, watching as the end drew near. The air was thick with grief and tension. Would Dearman say anything to ease their pain? Strapped to the gurney, Dearman was given a chance to speak his final words. Looking toward the witnesses, he addressed the victims' families directly. "Forgive me. This is not for me. This is for you. I've taken so much." He then turned his thoughts to his own family, saying, "I love y'all." The words were simple but heavy, a mix of apology and farewell. Did they bring closure to those watching? Or did they stir more questions about a man who claimed remorse but could never undo his actions? At approximately 6 p.m., the execution began. Alabama's lethal injection protocol involved a 3-drug cocktail: midazolam to sedate, a paralytic to stop movement, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. The drugs flowed through in 4-line as Dearman lay still, his breathing slowing. Witnesses watched in silence as the minutes passed. At 6:14 p.m., Derrick Dearman was pronounced dead, his life ending 7 years after the night he took 5 others. The victims' families left the chamber, carrying the weight of their loss, while Dearman's story closed in a room built for justice. Derrick Dearman's story ends here, but the pain he left behind lives on in the hearts of the victims' families. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to get more stories like this.